Hi folks, it's Thinking Slow here. I wanted to do a quick video because a email that surfaced in the US has caused a bit of an outcry about smearing scientists, particularly the authors of the Great Barrington Declaration. And I was quite surprised that nobody had really covered that same angle for what happened to British scientists. And I basically wanted to go through the way that Carl Hennigan and Professor Gupta were discredited completely dishonestly by members of our own political class, where they made things up about those academics in order to discredit them. And I have the copies of the various tweets and other notes that were used to discredit our leading scientists, and I thought I'd go through that quickly. So here is this was obtained by a Freedom of Information request from the NIH in the US. And this is Francis Collins, who is head of that, who is technically boss. And if you haven't seen this is about the Great Barrington Declaration. And basically these bureaucrats between them, in response to the Great Barrington Declaration, the head, Francis Collins, has requested a quick and devastating takedown of its premises. So there's nothing here about, let's engage, find out what this is about, because this declaration is authored by three, possibly of the greatest epidemiologists there are. There's certainly from institutions, Oxford, Stanford, and Harvard, that are world class. So rather than that will automatically establish their credentials, but rather than engaging, this individual wants it taken down, basically. And this caused a bit of a storm when it was released. And I'm just wondering, in a way, why nobody has looked at that picture in the UK, because the UK picture is just as bad. In fact, to my mind, it's actually worse. So let's start with one of the main protagonists, our old friend Neil O'Brien, who spent most of 2020 slandering our scientists who questioned the completely pointless and destructive lockdown policy. So here's one of the main tricks that they used, and I'm just going to read this section here that he said. So the people who told us that Sweden was the way to go in the summer and said there could be no second wave, like Gupta, are not the people to provide it. And he's talking about alternative views and advice. He mentions Gupta, no professor, no Sinatra, just a dismissive surname. And what's important is it's a flat-out lie. This is something that Professor Gupta said in summer 2020, because all of this correspondence is around that then, in an article that she wrote or an interview that she gave in reaction. She said, "I suspect that in the winter it will probably come back." Now, Neil O'Brien has completely falsely said that Professor Gupta said there could be no second wave. Where you can put these two things next to each other and you understand that Neil O'Brien is lying, something he's done fairly regularly. Now, we could spend time writing to the authorities in Parliament, because there is a code of conduct there, and this is an extract from the code of conduct. I don't believe this conduct falls within any kind of normal behaviour. And this is actually the extract. Members should always behave with probity and integrity. Well, clearly, there's no integrity in inventing predictions that Professor Gupta never made and then discrediting them. But we'll go on from there, basically. Here's another one. This is, again, Neil O'Brien involved in this conversation. This is now again trying to discredit Carl Hennigan with there'll be no second wave. I don't have all the correspondence here because I've been blocked from this, basically. But this is, again, the same message. I've yet to see any admission from Hennigan that he got things wrong. Not even there's no second wave in inverted commas. Well, what did Professor Hennigan say in September 2020 when he was being discredited like this? He actually said, there would be a second wave, and deaths would peak in mid January, which is basically exactly what happened. Deaths peak in January for a seasonal coronavirus, and he actually said, if there was to be a lockdown, it didn't make sense to do that in September, which is right. It would make sense if you're going to do that. It's such a drastic measure to do it in Christmas before a January peak in deaths. So again, he's being completely misrepresented here, and actually he said essentially the opposite of what he's being accused of saying. He said there would be a second wave and deaths peaking in early January. So this is smearing in its worst possible form, basically. And although Neil O'Brien is not directly doing this, this is part of a chain of correspondence that he's been involved in. And we'll come back as well to that a little bit. Just one more example then is Neil O'Brien writing in response to a comment that I think is coming from Mike Yaden, or at least it's claiming to come from Mike Yaden, that basically the comment was there's no evidence that measures significantly slow transmission. And then it goes on to say people will die as a result of such measures. Now, those two things are completely true, of course, because as we've said right from the beginning, there's no evidence that lockdown slowed transmission. In fact, there's some slightly unusual evidence that it did the opposite. But anyway, this is a true statement. And actually, in terms of deaths as a result of measures, that's something that's been acknowledged by SAGE way back in July 2020. And actually, the years of life lost from lockdown would be higher than from COVID. That's also an acknowledged fact from SAGE. So I would say here these are two factual statements, and the response is a nutcase. And Neil O'Brien is calling a nutcase an individual who has a first-class degree in biochemistry, PhD in pharmacology, Chief Scientific Officer for Pfizer R&D in the Allergy and Respiratory Research, and then Chief Scientific Officer in Pfizer Global, also in the Allergy and Respiratory Research. So, somebody who has, so many more qualifications than this person, to call them a nutcase is just beyond the pale. And again, it makes a mockery of this parliamentary code of conduct. There's no probity in the behavior of Neil O'Brien making statements like that. Really outrageous, to be honest. And just flicking quickly through what Mike Yaden said is basically backed up by an enormous body of science that lockdowns don't have an effect, basically. And this body is building and building. So it was a factual statement to which a sitting MP responded that he's a nutcase for making it. So moving on, here's another political operative, Dominic Cummings, and his testimony to Parliament that we've done a separate video on that I'd still recommend watching. Although he sort of portrays a sort of fairly cool open discussion, most of what he said was untrue or twisted beyond any recognition. And interestingly enough, he's pushing the same lies that Neil O'Brien is pushing about Professor Gupta and Carl Hennigan. And here he's specifically saying there won't be any second wave. He's referring to various people who's saying there won't be any second wave. Well, we've seen in the other slides that both Professor Gupta and Carl Hennigan said there would be a second wave. So this statement here is entirely untrue. And then it's quite interesting the way he refers to a guy called Hennigan. A guy called Hennigan is Professor of Evidence-Based Medicine at Oxford University. His qualifications are BM, BCH, MA, MRC, GP, DPhil. And I think the dismissive way he refers to someone with qualifications like that is indicative that these political operatives are extremely, let's say, uncourteous. I think that's the best that can be said for them. People who are trying to impose their sort of have-a-go epidemiology knowledge and ignore at the same time other very valid and eminently well-qualified voices. And then he does the same, basically, a woman from Oxford. I mean, it's totally mind-bending that you can refer to a professor of theoretical epidemiology at Oxford University in this way. But this, I think, is indicative of the dismissive and disrespectful way that, frankly, a highly unpleasant individual refers to opinions that don't fit within his own bizarre interpretation of maths and epidemiology. So that again, the interesting thing about this was that this is the same lies spread by a different person, basically, but I think all members of the same clique. So really, this video shows, I think, that our own scientists have been smeared just as badly, if not more, if not even worse than the email from NIH indicates, and that's something that should be covered more. I think if the NIH email generated outrage, I think for at least for us, the things that we looked at and put in this presentation also generated outrage. But essentially what we ended up with is a tight clique of these sort of have-a-go epidemiologists. This is from Cummings's ramblings that he put up on the screen, pushing policies that, it doesn't really matter when this is acknowledged, but at some point it's going to have to be acknowledged that lockdowns don't work and the collateral damage from lockdown is many, many fold higher than from COVID. So they can bully and smear eminently well-qualified scientists for as long as they like, but eventually the truth is going to come out. But it's it's a very unhealthy environment for anyone that wants to make a contribution to debate, having to deal with this kind of political operative. And then just closing up, basically, this is one of Warren Buffett's great quotes. You look for three things in a person: intelligence, energy, and integrity. And if they don't have the last one, then forget the first two. And we touched on this with still a very good interview with Reverend Franklin about the importance of integrity. And I think one lesson from this whole mess is that we've looked past integrity and we've gone with, whatever other qualities, if any, some of these people bring to the table. We've forgotten about integrity, and we do have a government now where almost every cabinet secretary more or less lies about something on a regular basis. So, this is what makes the political class quite dangerous now. They have more or less no integrity or little integrity. So, within that context, the smears that I've gone through very quickly today, not surprising, because this is the way these people operate. And as John McAfee said, we need to be careful about who we give power to. And I think where we are now is we've got very much the wrong kind of people in power, as I said, lacking integrity, and therefore when they encounter reasonable debate, they will just tend to respond with a smear campaign rather than address any merits of what people are saying. So hopefully that was informative. And as I said, the way scientists have been treated in the UK is certainly no better than in the US. And be nice to see some more coverage of this and create an environment where it's possible for eminent scientists to actually have their say. So hopefully you found this interesting. As we always say, stay free, don't stay safe, because without freedom you don't have safety. Thank you. Goodbye.